Hello, my name is Aiden Shrestha, candidate number 7003. I'm from JP Taravella High School, center number UX977. And today, I will present my research, which dives into the problem of the deportation of illegal immigrants. My research will be primarily focused on the economic aspect of this issue. The overarching problem of the deportation of immigrants, what are some problems that you see alongside? Well, you see the problem of separation of families, psychological harm, and economic costs. Separation of family happens when immigrant families are caught by these different governments instead of the whole family being deported. What rather happens is it's just the parents that get deported while the children are placed in foster cares or with other guardians and are separated from their families. Psychological harm happens because either they're in fear of being prosecuted, in fear of being deported, they're either being mistreated in their workplace, or because of the psychological harm from getting separated from their families with no connection. Now, economic cost refers to two things. Either the deportation transportation, how much it would cost to transport the immigrants, or the actual jobs lost. Essentially, because immigrants and undocumented immigrants make up portions of industries such as agriculture or construction, it would cause a heavy strain. So circling back onto the original point on the economy, the transportation, and the overall deportation as a whole. So in the United States, the American Immigration Council, a nonprofit organization dedicated for 50 years to finding out anything to do with immigration and spreading awareness and truth about immigration in the United States, found essentially that if the United States were to do a one-time mass deportation of all the immigrants in the United States, it would cost at least, at minimum, $315 billion for American taxpayers. So this would cause a heavy strain on the economy while increasing taxes and increasing prices due to that heavy strain it puts. So what are the actual impacts of the deportation of illegal immigrants? Well, the impacts are twofold. The workforce decreasing and a rising hatred toward immigrants. Workforce decrease means that these work industries such as agriculture and construction have a heavy reliance on actual immigrants itself. If immigrants were to be deported and these industries would no longer have those workers, then they would essentially fail, or essentially not be able to produce the same amount of goods and services as before. Rising hatred toward immigrants is saying that there's been a rise in political hatred and a rise in extremism towards the actual immigrants as a whole, or xenophobia. Essentially, through these actual people in power putting these immigrants in such a negative connotation or such a negative light, there's been an increased amount in hatred towards them. This was reported by a newspaper in the United Arab Emirates, Gulf News, which is the largest English newspaper, so they have a reason to be credible. They have to be able to prove and back up their facts, or they lose out on their reputation as being the largest and most best-selling publisher within the United Arab Emirates. And essentially, they're finding that immigrants have been painted in a much more negative light recently, onto the economic effects that the deportation of illegal immigrants has. So, to reiterate, the American Immigration Council found that it would cost $350 billion in America to deport all illegal immigrants. Not only that, but it was found by multiple different sources, such as Kevin Appleby, a senior executive at the Center for Migration Studies, he's been working with migration and that sort of topic for the past decade, and he's written multiple works on it, and he found that immigrants in 2022 to 2020 in past few years have contributed upwards of hundreds of billions in federal taxes and hundreds of billions in local state taxes in the United States. And the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy furthers this by finding out that in America, in recent years, immigrants have paid 40 billion in state and local taxes. What this means is that Kevin Appleby and the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy both agree on this sort of dominant push and growth that undocumented immigrants have, showing this correlation on the economic effect and downfall that it would have if these immigrants were to be deported, causing this GDP loss and this national revenue loss, as countries would be losing out on this. Now, although this is just US based, you can correlate this to other nations, as other nations still do depend on immigrants just like the United States. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, or the ITEP, is essentially a nonprofit organization working for 45 years and has written multiple reports on economic and tax reports within the United States. What is the actual solution to the deportation of illegal immigrants? So, the solution is to provide amnesty. Amnesty is an official pardon to anyone that has committed a political offense. So, in a sense, to giving these illegal immigrants amnesty is essentially pardoning them for their crimes and giving them a form of legalization within these different nations. But now, The actual benefits of amnesty have been proven time and time again. There's been precedent around the world in multiple nations in all corners of the world where amnesty has been able to increase employment, wages, and GDP. A potential reason for this is because immigrants now have a more incentive and a more reason to be able to work. They either have no more fear of prosecution, no more fear of being deported, and now they're able to work freely to be able to provide for their families in these new nations and for their people or for their families back home. Moving on to the first example of France's 1981 reform. During this time period, Francois Mitterrand, the current French president, had implemented a work amnesty to certain individuals that were illegal who were working at the time. Essentially, the short-term benefits was that Paris had seen a 4% employment growth and wages had grown by 3%. Now, if you looked at this chart on the right, you're able to see the long-term effects. So this chart comes from the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It is an international intergovernmental organization that is promoting the economic growth and well-being of all around 100 nations within this organization. The OECD was established in 1961, so around a decade prior to when this graph first starts measuring, and is located in Paris. So the graph itself is measuring labor productivity measured as the GDP per hour in France from the time period of 1971 to 2020. So 50 years. And it was able to see that before 1981, before this amnesty was implemented, there was low labor productivity. But after 1981, there was high exponential everlasting effects and everlasting economic growth that France has been able to see, which could be in part due to the actual amnesty that happened in 1981. Now, looking at Italian regulation. Now, Italy is a very special case. Italy relies a heavy majority on immigrants. Immigrant growth is a large portion of Italy itself. 92% of immigrants that work in Italy provide $3 billion to the nation itself. Now, Eric R. Vikstrom provided and wrote a book regarding Senegalese immigrants and their contributions to immigration. And what he found in his book found that Senegalese, when were given a residence status on a work permit after provided amnesty, were able to give higher employment rates than those with no work status and no residence status. Now, he is a very credible author because Eric Vikstrom, this book he published was in 2019, and he had previously done a study in 2016 regarding the same Senegalese immigrants. He has been following Senegalese immigrants and their contributions to different global economies for many years on end. So he is very credible when it comes to regarding the different contributions done by these immigrants. This last and final example, the United States IRCA of 1986, or the Immigration Reform and Control Act. This is a key factor because in the United States, when they provided this amnesty and had all these immigrants become legalized, this caused more immigrants to come in, both legal and illegal. Now, why is this important? Because these immigrants are going to take up or did take up these jobs in crucial industries. As I previously mentioned, they took up jobs in these lower skilled workforces such as farming and agriculture and construction. If you look to this chart on the right, you're able to see about undocumented immigrants in the United States in the millions from 1990 to 2020. So 30 years. And you're able to see that after near the 1990s, after and onward, you're able to see an exponential growth reaching from around 4 million to 12 million. Why is this key? Because this means more workers are in the United States now. There's more wages and more immigrants, meaning more taxes from these immigrants. Now, specifically, let's quantify this. The U.S. Department of Agriculture found that between 2022 to 2023, 42%, or nearly half of the farmers working in the United States, were undocumented. Why is this key? The U.S. Department of Agriculture has been reporting these statistics for 35 years. They've been watching this and watching these numbers for decades on end. But now, what can we as a society do to make a step in the right direction? So there's a couple things that we can do as a society. We can either contact our local lawmakers that are going to pass more immigration friendly or more progressive immigration reform bills, or we can push and elect leaders that would actually pass those laws in the first place. Thank you and have a nice day.